Here we go. So to start out today, I want to do a little review about last week for those of us who weren't here, and just to kind of solidify in our mind about goals, objectives. What are some key points that stood out to you from last time? We talked about goals and objectives and outcomes and vision. Vision, not really, but.
There was a piece about stressing the need, like if you don't give us this grant, the world is going to fall apart, sort of thing. And good advice.
Yes, the need. So the need sells your proposal, right? So you want to, I like how you say that. If we don't give us this grant, the world's going to fall apart. I like that. Just like it's a bright, shining world. I get some new phrases here with all of you in. So, right, your vision is this bright, shiny world, and the need is if you don't get this grant, the world's going to fall apart. It's so bad. So that sells your project. What is your sponsor or the funder buying?
Your idea.
They're buying your idea. What specifically about your idea?
Or the goals. Your outcomes?
Your outcomes. They're buying your outcomes, the measurable difference that you'll make in the world. So if you think about that, some people are like, oh, the goals and objectives and outcomes. But really, your objectives are what you'll do, and the outcomes are what happens from that. And so if you think about it, that's really what your funder is buying, the outcomes that you give them, how things are going to be different. If it's a research project, they're buying the research that you say that you're going to do and the outcomes of that research. Answers to those questions. So really, if you think about a transaction, it kind of helps you, I think, this idea, like this isn't just you write this paper and hope it's good enough. It's like you're strategic about the need, advertising, and outcomes, objectives, or research questions, what they're buying. Anything else that stood out?
Yeah, the SMART objective or the SMART acronym that you shared, it kind of really sticks to me. So that was a good share.
So what makes what's the SMART? It's S is for
specific, measurable, achievable, relatable, and time bound.
Yep. So your objective should have all those components to it. That it's you're really exact in what you're saying, and that you can measure it. That's realistic. That it relates to your goals. Your goals are these like higher level statements, and your objectives are kind of these steps that you're going to do to achieve your goals. Good job. So now we're going to go talk about our budget. And I would get excited about budgets, Yeah. The thing about budgets, not much in this world turns out exactly, and everything's messy, right? But when you do your planning budget for your proposal, it's exact. The only time it'll be exact, when you run your project, it won't be. But, that's a whole another thing. Let me get my slides up. I'm now sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. I just want to give credit for Cheryl Research. She's the one who has helped me devise my budget slides. She helped me one time and just use her same slides. So I really like that. She can't be here today, but she is here in spirit. So we reviewed our goals and objectives. The budget's important. So I would say when I'm looking at a project, I really like to look at the budget. I think in like a 5-minute review of your budget, I feel like I know what you're doing. I might not know your exact goals and objectives, but I get the gist of your project. So when you're doing a budget and you're thinking, oh, this doesn't matter, it does. Your reviewer is probably going to feel the same way. They're going to look at your budget and they're going to get a sense of what you're actually doing, where you're putting the money. So it's another story of your proposal, and it's a very succinct one. And I think it's there's no hiding what you're doing in it. So it serves as a blueprint for your project objectives. It really, how you're going to achieve those objectives is shown in the way you place your money. We already kind of talked about this, having an in-depth a picture of how your project is going to be structured and managed. It also reveals whether a project's being carefully planned or is feasible. So if you just have wild numbers in there or gross estimates, they're going to know that you really haven't put a lot of thought into your budget. Or if there's pieces missing, if you say in your narrative you're going to do something and it's not there, they'll see that. And so that's why I struggle way to put this in my sessions, because we just talked about goals and objectives, and activities really align to your objectives. But I feel like you really can't figure out your activities until your budget. So I do my budget pretty early on, the proposal development. I might do it almost at the beginning. Once I get my concept down and kind of know what I'm doing. Because if I say I'm going to serve 500 students and all of a sudden, oops, I do my budget, I can only serve 100. I need to know that. And if I go back and then edit my whole narrative, I'm wasting time. And I also might miss something. So budget's important from the beginning. And it really is a good planning tool once a project is launched and you start your project. So if you have a well-planned budget, that means that you're gonna have to do less special requests to your sponsor. Like if you forgot things that require sponsor approval, you have to keep going back to your sponsor and asking for approval. And you just don't really want to do that. You don't want to draw attention to your project that you're making changes. So this wonderful slide is from Cheryl. I think she might have grabbed it from when she worked at ORS. But this is kind of like, should we apply for funding based on the budget? So I mean, first you look at the budget amount and you make a simple budget, and we'll kind of talk through that today. And then you ask yourself questions about the budget. So, you know, do we have adequate support and staffing for this project? Do we have support facilities wise for the project? Do we have the equipment to support the project? Is there a cost share? Can we commit to that cost share? So cost share can be a restrictor or prohibitor sometimes of doing a grant if it's required. Does everybody know what cost share is? What is cost share again? Do we talk about it much?
Is that when you have another partner in the project? I mean, if it's a cooperative grant? Or cost share with the campus you're on? I don't know.
Any, Stuart?
Yeah, I would say that it's the amount that you have to come up with to match the amount that you're being funded from the funding agency.
Oh.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that a little bit more in the budget, but basically sometimes they say you have to come up with 20% of the project costs, and then we have to figure out how to do that, or 50%. And then is our mission consistent with the funding priorities and project outcomes? So we haven't really talked about it much, but there's a grant review form that everybody has to fill out. This is part of our accreditation that all of our grants need to align to our mission. Our mission is really broad, so it's not hard to do. It's everything that you probably want to do is in there somehow, but we just have to make sure it aligns to what we do. And then does the funding level meet our needs? So sometimes the funding level might be kind of small, might be like 15,000, 20,000, or maybe even 50,000. And you look at it and you plan everything out and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do the project I have in mind for that. So you have to weigh that out. Sometimes there's a restriction on budget. So just because you found this grant that you think will work for you, you need to really think about your budget and see if it's worth the time in applying for it. So budgets have two primarily, you can think about it two ways: direct costs. So that's the amount that we directly attributed to the grant. So that's like your staff, supplies, things that you do. So like 50% position would be a direct cost. Education materials for the project would be a direct cost. Evaluation would be a direct cost. So those are direct costs. Indirect costs are overhead costs spent to accommodate extramural projects. So everybody, when you do indirect costs, it eats up your budget. It's like 45% or so, depending on what your project is. But it's actually calculated on real costs for the institution to do business and have grants. So that's the time of the administration, it's the time of the fiscal offices, it's the time of just even maintaining the facilities and electricity or other energy related costs. So when you feel like, oh, I don't want to do that, I mean, those are real costs for our institution. So we try to honor that as best we can. And sometimes the sponsor will have a cap on indirect costs. So it's critical that all costs charged to the grant. There's a uniform guidance, federal regulations on how a grant money can be spent. And they want to know that it's allocable to the grant. So basically that what you're charging is a direct expense of your activities, not that you're paying for something else. Allowable, so allowables by the federal policy, sponsor policy, UH policy, can you actually buy that? There's some things that you can't buy. Like generally you can't buy like alcohol for a meal unless special, without special reasons for it. Like reasonable and necessary for the performance of the project. Is this directly related to your objectives? So when once we get a project and when we procure stuff, I relate all my procurement justification to my objectives. I think it's a good practice to do every single purchase you make to relate it to your objectives and the justification, showing that's reasonable and necessary. And then consistently treated by the UH in similar situations. So the UH can't say something is a direct cost on one project and an indirect cost on another, or not allowable on one project and allowable on another. So sometimes, I'm trying to think of this. So sometimes for like non-credit, like there's a little less consistency about how tuition is charged and made. So it has to be consistent. They can't charge, sometimes they charge like double overhead of tuition, like they hike up the prices and sometimes they don't. And that's not consistent. So you can't do that kind of thing. And then adequately documented. You have to have a trail, which our fiscal office does for us. So indirect costs, you also might hear them called F&A, facilities and administrative costs. This is we hear a lot about RTRF funds. They come from the indirect costs, those like accounts that we have the RTRF funds. So as I said before, it's negotiated rate with the federal government. So this rate isn't just doesn't just fall out of the sky. No one just takes a guess and says it's actually calculated based on our actual cost of doing business. So it's a policy to recover the indirect costs unless the rate is capped by the sponsor. And we can't request support for expenses recovered through institutions' indirect cost calculation. So we can't, this is going to be a little confusing because of our new way we have the business, our extramural business office set up, but we can't charge grants for like Cheryl's time or OEP's time. We can't charge grants time admin staff take to approve the procurement. ESC is something different, extramural service center. They're actually supporting projects and preparing the documents. So that can be directly allocable because of spending time to put the documents in. But then like OEP or the UH business office can't charge their time to a grant. Or like we can't charge Louis' time if he supervises a grant to a grant because it's already covered in the F&A calculations. So when you calculate indirect costs, and we'll go through this, and I have a budget template that I shared with you that already considers this for the most part, but everything has this indirect cost assigned to it. So if you have a staff time, there's the indirect cost assigned to that. But some things are exempt from having an indirect cost, and that's equipment. So equipment has a specific definition that we'll get into. People get confused about that, but participant support, so that's so directly related to a participant. So that would be if a participant has a stipend or tuition paid for them, office leases for space, because more or less we're already saying that we're covering that in the institution's costs. So if it's not covered, if you're leasing a space, then there can't be indirect costs assessed to that. And then any amount of a subaward over 25,000. So there's vendor contracts that aren't subawards, and there's subawards where you're working with a partner to influence your objectives of your grant, or they have responsibility. And then only the first 25,000, even if it's a 5-year contract, only the first 25,000 is calculated with indirect costs. So these are what indirect cost rates look like. They're from ORS. You have to go to the website because they can be updated and they can change. So different rates. So we're in fiscal year 2021. So research on campus is 44.5%, but then next year is 45%. Research off campus. So sometimes people do research in the field. Instruction's always 45%. Off campus instruction's lower at 26%. And then other sponsored activities, and there's a definition for what that is, but more like workshops or different sorts of things that aren't education and training. So that's for indirect costs, what they look like. Any questions about that?
This isn't very a serious question. I'm just looking at the research on campus Kaka'ako. Why is that so much larger? I don't know.
Because their cost of doing business might be higher. I don't even know.
I don't really need to know. I just that's.
No. I've seen it, but I've never looked. It just doesn't apply to us. But good question. The rate of doing business must be much higher. So typical budget categories. When you look at a budget, it's usually broken out to its line items, personnel. So I've had this on your worksheet too that I emailed to you, and I will share a link. But salary, you can go to different sites to get an estimate of what you should be putting in there for salary, if you care to do that. But that helps when you try to hire someone, because sometimes it's harder to get different rates of pay than what is kind of structured for that type of position. Fringe rates are set on the by ORS based on real costs for UH, and then RCH sets their own rates. So they're different rates based on what type of position. So you could have grant positions that are UH positions, and you can have grant positions that are RCH positions. Personnel basically generally eats up the largest part of your grant budget. So travel generally is broken down to airfare, your per diem, mileage, parking, transportation, registration fees. Actually, registration fees generally go into other. I'll have to fix that slide. But you have to consider that when you're thinking about the travel that you need to do. And that's also generally based on rates. And I gave you links, and those links on your worksheet as well to look at current rates for that. Equipment has a definition. So it's one piece that's greater than $5,000 per unit with a useful life of 1 year. So a lot of times I see people want to get computers, and we call computers equipment. And do you think do computers meet this definition?
if you buy a powerful enough one.
For Jen and a grant, we're not, unless you're doing specific calculations that Chad just might do. Right? So generally, our computers are less than $5,000 per unit. And that doesn't include the software, it doesn't include printers or whatever. So, so just remember, even though we call it equipment, the definition is that has to be 5,000 or more for 1 unit and has to have a useful life of 1 year. So I can't think of a good example of this, but say you're buying.
In my situation, we ended up buying a server. So that cost like 12,000. Yeah.
Yep. So it seems like a decent Xerox copy machine now is running over 5,000 if you're doing big bulk copies. It's like we ran into that problem for Gear Up where they have, I mean, basically they serve the whole cohort at 2 schools. Now it's in high school, so it's just expanded. So they have 868 students. So that's a lot of copies to make of a flyer or a permission slip to try to get the whole cohort involved. It's really expensive to print. I mean, each printing cycle of a multi-page handout to give their students information is like a few $1,000s, right? So that really makes sense that they have this. But to get one to do the job costs over $5,000. And so there was like this back and forth about, is that allowable? Is that an extreme expense? But I think you just need to think about that if you're going to be doing that level of copying. I think a few years back, they might not have been over 5,000, but now that's seeming to be a thing that I see projects running too.
Melissa, a question about, say, the EV charging stations. Let's say the cost came out close to, but just under 5,000, but there was an infrastructure cost that was spread out over 10 or 40 charging stations. Could that be apportioned to add it and push the number above the, no?
No, because it has to be per unit. So if you're adding the infrastructure costs associated with that, it's a different charge.
Okay, it's.
Because are you buying the purchase from the same vendor? Is it infrastructure costs from the same vendor that you buy the EV charging station from?
Well, like with Johnson Controls, they actually they contracted out the infrastructure to put in the conduit and do the trenching and so on. And they also kind of sold us the charging station, but the charging station, they bought the charging stations from somebody else. So all the money went to Johnson Controls, or it was, through the power purchase agreement, it got to Johnson Controls, but they subcontracted the various pieces.
Right, so then we're not even getting the bill for the individual pieces, so we're paying the contract.
Yeah.
In the contract, then this doesn't fall under equipment because they're buying it, installing that as part of their contract. If they were a sub-award, so if they directly impact their goals and objectives and our programming, then you would only need to pay the first or indirect costs in the first 25,000 of that sub-award. Say the sub-award's 100,000 for a 4-year project, so $400,000. You only pay the indirect costs on 25,000 the first year.
Yeah.
But sub-awards are hard. It takes a long time. Like I had a project where I had a researcher and evaluation as a sub-award. I probably wouldn't do evaluation as a sub-award again, but I did them both as sub-awards, and they took, especially the researcher, it took like 1.5 years to get the sub-award approved. And that's what's pushing it all the time. Fortunately, the researcher was willing to do the work on the NSF grant, but if they're not willing to do the work and you don't have that trusting relationship with them, or they just can't do the work without that, you just need to rethink about the sub-award because it's a process. my evaluator who's on top of it and a better established business got it done probably in 8 or 9 months.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good questions though. Equipment though, you know, if the equipment is like $4,900 per unit, with taxes, it probably going to go over 5,000. So if it's really close to that threshold, then I might put it 5,000 and put in equipment.
Yeah.
So good questions. So supplies. So your computers go under supplies. They're an office. Oh, there would be like a supply expense. Say you are a carpentry program and you're getting tools, or I think we had EV, electric vehicle maintenance project, right? So their tools are supplies. They're not equipment in a budget. Participant support costs are the direct stipends and tuition costs for two students. If you're paying for like travel for a student to fly somewhere for a college visit or to attend a conference, that's also a participant support cost because it's directly allocated to the participant. And then contractual subawards, consultants, evaluators, service vendors like Johnson Controls would be are your contractual line item. Construction generally we don't do, and generally it's not allowed on a grant unless they specifically say it is. And then other, there could be printing, publication costs, software. You know, actually registration fees for conferences go under other, not in the travel line item. And then indirect costs. So as I said before, do your budget early on. And so you know what your funding parameters are. And that's what I have. Is there any questions that you have? Okay, let's do one together. I have this neat template. Let me share the template online. I don't know if it's a neat template. It's a template I use every single time that I start from, more or less. Some versions are better than others because sometimes I improve them. So I never know which one I start. I usually start with like the last project I did or the most similar project I did to work on the budget. Let me pull it up. Who wants to be a sample project for today?
I would.
Okay, thanks. Stuart. Okay, here we are. Y'all see the budget development, the Excel spreadsheet?
I do.
Okay, so projects can be multi-years, and then I generally copy the tab and add more tabs to the years, and I usually put a cover sheet that pulls the numbers and adds them up. But truthfully, I always start from the one page because I always have to redo those formulas. So just tell us, give us a quick description of what your project is, Stuart.
Add 40 or some number of EV charging stations to the campus network. Yeah, that's basically it at this point. Just increase the amount of workplace charging on the campus.
Okay. So do we need personnel for that?
Definitely.
What kind of personnel do you need?
Project manager.
And what percentage of time do you think?
50%.
And let's see, what kind of salary, yearly annual salary?
So is that separate from the PI and the sub PI, or is that?
Well, the project manager could be the PI.
Okay.
or it doesn't have to be the PI, or it could be the co-PI. It doesn't have to be. So, I mean, everything varies.
Well, I guess then it would depend on what the level that the project manager was at, but I would say roughly $86,000 would be their annual.
And we're, for the sake of this example, we're not going to go and look at the pay scales.
Yeah.
To see what we would need to be at. So, but project manager. So, do you think would there be like a PI or co-PI that's like a faculty member, or?
Yeah, likely, but not necessarily, depending on who stepped up to do the project. Very possibly it would be me. So I'm not, I'm not sure my status exactly. I'm retired. So
Okay, got it. So
yeah, I'd be RCUH. It would be.
Something like an energy specialist. And put the same rate.
Yeah.
You think 50% or like 25%?
Yeah, keep it 50%.
Now, maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting, because the other person I would be thinking of would be the medicine specialist to integrate the campus energy usage through Medisys so that the charging of the vehicles would be intelligent. So that would require somebody to manage Medisys as well.
What percentage do you think that would be at?
25.
Same rate or different rate?
Let's see. Look like 6,800 a month was what we thought of the last time.
And your positions may or may not be at this level. Again, you need to check what's reasonable based on the links, and they're in this. They're here too. They're in this file, and they're in this the other one that I will send you.
Yeah.
So let's say we need like a subject matter expert. So we're going to say data specialist.
Yeah.
You might need that. And let's say we're going to say 6 credits. So I estimate credits if you're working with a faculty or a staff member. I estimate, I generally estimate it at 2,000 per credit. You can get more exact. You know what? I'm just going to say this as something else so I don't. So it doesn't save over my template. Again, the trouble when I start sending out my samples, that sometimes they're already like specifically done. Okay, so is there other staffing you think you might need?
Fiscal specialist.
Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you. All grants we want to have a fiscal specialist. That's ESC support. See, one, we're kind of being required to do it, but they can help you with your procurement. I usually put in the amount of procurement. This might be procurement intensive, so I might put 25%. I put somewhere between 10 and 25%. And maybe 15, I don't know. And then I base this off of 60,000 salary year divided by 12. So it's like 5,000. Okay, now let's look at the fringe rate. The project manager, would that be an RCUH position or would that be a?
I'd say RCUH.
RCUH. So RCUH is 37.17, which you can get from these links here. Energy specialist would probably be RCUH, right?
Yes.
Medicine specialist could be RCUH position. fiscal specialist is our switch position. Even though the fiscal specialist is below 50%, we still need to use the full rate because their time is split between many projects. The data specialist would be like a faculty or staff that's getting 6 credits during the summer. That would be at 2.07, which is the overload. So then this adds this all up to us. I have my formulas that round them, and then we know that. So equipment, is there any equipment, anything that you're buying that's over $5,000
Yeah, charging stations.
per piece? They're over 5,000.
Yeah.
And how many?
I'd say 40,
How much per piece?
5,000.
Is there any other equipment that you need?
I'm not thinking of any right now.
Okay, so look at this. This is set up where it says how much your budget amount is and then how much is subject to indirect costs. So you see this personnel and fringe is subject to indirect costs, but then equipment is not.
I see. Yeah,
Any materials and supplies?
sure.
Someone else can jump in. What do you think you might need for technology and or materials and supplies?
Well, he'll need the chargers. He'll need the infrastructure that he talked about. I'm guessing, especially since he's retired, he probably should have a computer or two for him and the project manager.
Yeah.
And whoever else.
Yes. Okay, that sounds great.
It probably could go on.
Definitely a couple of computers in there. At least 2.
Well, maybe 3 for the 3 main positions.
Yeah.
Infrastructure.
No.
Oh, go ahead.
What about an EV car itself to test your stations?
That would be a good idea.
How much do those cost?
40,000.
Infrastructure supplies, I don't know, 50,000.
So I wonder about that. So what about the contractor who is going to install these? Wouldn't they just give sort of a number for the whole installation that would include those supplies? The infrastructure stuff.
So vendor would be like Johnson Controls.
Yeah, likely. Yeah, I think they have a standing contract for like a 20-year service contract, so it's always easier to just extend that one.
How much do you think per year?
Well, the last time around we had 250,000, but that included the bus as well, and so I would say 200,000.
So are they more contractor and vendor within a sub award, right?
Yeah.
So I like to always put something for supplies just in case.
Sure. Yeah, there could be other types of supplies, not necessarily building out the infrastructure, but.
Just because this is more of a kind of construction, I put it pretty high. But if you have a high amount like that, you're gonna have to list kind of what types of supplies you're buying. I think if you're like 5,000 or under, you can just say you're gonna get, supplies to run your projects, such as printing materials, education materials, things to do outreach, ink, toner, whatever. But I think if you're at 20,000 or even 10,000, you need to start, even 7,000, you need to start saying what specifically you're going to buy. I know there's some projects that do, like our water quality testing projects have a lot of chemicals they buy. So their supply is really high with chemicals and like testing sort of supplies. And then travel. Maybe travel involved.
Yeah, I'd say at least 2 conferences, probably on the mainland, maybe one on Oahu. So the mainland ones used to run about 5,000 each for the travel itself.
Okay, well, mine's a little low for that, but you can adjust this.
Right, 4 days. Yeah, no, that does look reasonable.
You can adjust. Same if it's a 5-day conference and maybe 7 days of travel, because usually we have like 2 days for travel because we're traveling far.
Yeah.
And then inter-island travel would be same day or overnight.
Yeah. I think there would be multiple, and there would be a couple of per diem and a couple of overnights.
So I have better and worse versions of this. I have one version that has an overnight travel, but this one doesn't. So we'll just ignore the overnight for purposes of our thing. But you can add it. You can copy this in and paste.
Yeah.
Rows and
I know the number of days would be lower. Typically the inner islands would be 3 or 4 days.
Well, they're just overnight. Like I'm just assuming you have three different 1-day trips for 2 people.
Oh, I see.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Melissa, if Stuart wants to bring like an expert in the field and whatnot, what category would that be in?
So it depends.
The energy specialist would qualify for that.
Are you paying them?
Yeah, looks like it.
Okay, the energy specialist.
Yeah.
No, but somebody to like come visit and check out your project, you know, that kind of thing, like flying somebody in.
Like a specialist. So,
Yeah, but somebody who wasn't on board all the time, but like Velma says, somebody who just shows up for a weekend or a week or whatever. That there's a possibility that there'd be a need for that. They did that with when they were programming the Hitachi batteries that are back in that field. Some guys from Johnson Controls would show up sometimes for even longer, but they weren't on board all the time, but they were paid separately.
yeah, so it depends on how you do it. I mean, if you're talking about like paying some experts to come out, most likely they're a business and sounds kind of like a valuation or giving subject matter expertise. And so that would probably be a contract. So you would pay them a lump sum of money that they tell you they need in order to come out here and do this.
Yeah.
Okay, independent contractor then.
Contractor, yeah, that makes sense.
It depends on how you do it. Now, if you hire them, like if you hire them like as an intermittent hire, like 100 hours or whatever, and they come out here, then they're an employee, and then the travel costs go under your travel.
Okay.
It would likely be an independent contractor, but what if it were a UH employee, like somebody came over from Manoa or something?
Oh yeah,
like
then
that.
you just would add it here.
Yeah.
Or wherever. So if you just would add it in your normal travel. So if it was like someone from UH Manoa that's not hired for the project, but they're in the university system, you can pay for the travel directly.
Yeah.
So would you need to have them as overload? If they're
Well, oh, it depends on the situation. If they're a UH or RCUH employee already, and they're coming and they're volunteering their times, for example.
Or it could be part of their job description, like
Right.
mine was like the energy coordinator, the sustainability.
Okay.
Yeah, so then you can pay from your grant any UH or RCH employee. They don't have to be employed with your grant directly. If there's someone outside of your grant, then it gets trickier. I'll give you a couple different scenarios. One is a consultant. So a consultant or expert that's coming here, they probably has a fee. They're probably gonna have you pay them for their time. And they probably just have the contract that you pay, which is easiest. They arrange their own travel. You might hire a specialist, a subject matter expert, as Rachel mentioned, hire just for a few hours, like 100, 200 hours. And then you're your employee, and then your travel goes under the employee travel. We tried, so for Europe, for example, they have professional development and they're supposed to work closely with their administrative staff of their schools. So that was tricky. They were offering to pay for principals and vice principals to go to the Gear Up conference for professional development. So they actually could do the travel from their grant directly, but it was easier to pay a stipend to each person for travel.
Okay.
So stipends then kind of go under participant support costs. Even in that scenario, it's more of a participant support cost because they're a participant, they're getting services from the program. So then you do a stipend for travel. So we do stipends for travel. Even if you're paying for the travel directly and it's a participant, then it's under participant support costs. So, you could pay for their flight and their meals, but it still goes under participant support costs that no indirect costs are assessed.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's an adult participant, sometimes we're talking these administrators, they're adults, they're generally, we assume they're financially, we give them a choice, right? If we can set the travel directly for you, or we can give you a stipend for your travel. But generally it's easier just to give them a stipend and they're able to do it. But if you're working with a low income or disadvantaged student, you pretty much have to pay for the travel up front for them.
Okay.
So there are 3 different ways for travel then, depending on your scenario. So Winnie, you have a question?
Yeah. I'm a little bit lost in the contract and subaward, the Johnson contract. Johnson Controls, the $20,000. What is that for?
200,000, yeah.
Yeah, 20,000. What is that Johnson Controls?
So we purchased the charging stations. The campus has indicated that they want more EV charging. But we purchased the charging stations, but somebody has to install them. So that's what Johnson would do.
Okay, so Johnson Controls is the installation fees.
It's for
That
them
is
to actually
$5,000
physically
per
install all the electrical infrastructure that would have to go in to connect the charging stations.
Right. Okay, so that's the installation. And then that's separate from the $5,000 per unit equipment cost.
Exactly, buy the equipment separately and then,
okay.
yeah.
That makes sense because I was looking where's the installation. So that's what Johnson Control is. Okay. And then and the question is that the credit we have there's a 6 credit for one of the staff member. Now, is this 6 credit based on how long is the 6 credit is based on? What's the time span? Is it for the whole? How do we determine the 6 credit? Is 6 credit for 6 months? 6 credit for a year?
Usually summer overload.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, so 6 credits is the maximum that you could pay someone, a 9-month faculty. 6 credits is that you could pay them for summer overload. That's the only way to pay faculty, but they
Yeah.
might extend the full year on the project. It's just kind of this assumption. So I kind of think about like a 3-credit class. So a 9-month faculty is responsible, I think, for 27 credits during the academic year. So that's like 3 credits per month. So when I'm trying to calculate time, if I need to calculate like a percentage of time, I would do like, well, 27 and then 6 divided by 3, so that's 2 months time.
Oh, okay.
And 2 months divided by 12 is like 17% time. But I kind of think of it like a class, like 3 credits is a class.
Okay, I see.
Melissa,
Okay.
go ahead, Penny. Sorry.
One more thing is that typically charging station like this may have tax rebate that go back to the facility. How does this going to come into place when we apply for the grants? Do we have to report it, or how do we factor that part?
I think if it's a rebate, then it should come off the price of the equipment. So maybe 5,000 would be the net after the rebate was issued.
Yeah.
That's one possibility.
I don't know. I was just wondering, do we have to show it on the grant somewhere? Because on the budget spreadsheet and say, hey, at the end, here's the potential rebate. I'm not sure if such question will come back.
Yeah.
I think when you're submitting a grant, you're pretty safe to not include it. I mean, it gets pretty complicated. I don't know how that would necessarily be, if it would be reallocated to the program or if the institution would take that. I mean, there's a lot of questions on it. Like if the rebate was up front and then the charging stations were less, that would be a benefit to the program, right? But if they credit it to who purchased it and the program purchased it, then that would be a credit to the program. If it's like an energy rebate that's generally on taxes, then that would, I mean, I don't know how the whole tax thing goes.
Yeah, so normally the way that they like the parking lot PV array and charging stations that were there could not be purchased by the campus because they wouldn't receive any tax benefit because they're a nonprofit entity. So that's why most of those projects are financed through what they call a power purchase agreement, where somebody else who has the tax benefit actually owns the facility, but they sell the electricity back to the campus on a per unit basis for the electricity. So they can, and typically that's why they do it, is so they can receive the tax benefit.
So that's a very good and complicated question. Now, remember we talked about cost share. I guess my slides didn't cover cost share. I'll have to add one next time we do it about cost share. But cost share can be in kind or it could be in cash. So in kind cost share sometimes can be the discounts from third parties. So say your third party, well, it's kind of a discount. Like you actually, discounts are not allowable for cost share, but if they're giving you something. So say let's talk about charging stations if they give you a discount. So say if you,
Yeah, let's say Maui Electric were to say, we're going to give you the electricity for free.
that would be cost share.
Yeah.
Unless
Be a benefit to them because they're increasing the amount of EV charging on the island. Presumably more people will adopt and buy electric vehicles, which will in turn increase their revenues as people electrify their transportation. So that's what they could do. I mean, it would be a tough sell with them because that's the way they are, but it would be a possibility that they could provide free electricity for the charging stations. Whereas normally we would be paying you know, anywhere, 30 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever.
Yep, and also like if like charging stations, say they offer you a 10% discount. So a 10% discount could not be cost share, but
Right.
you can renegotiate that with them and say, hey, instead of giving us 10% discount on that, why don't you say you're going to give us 4 free? Cost is the same, but now you've got cost share because they gave you 4 free.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, you have to think about that. Like, and your vendors, like for cost share, like maybe they can give you free training and estimate the cost of that on the being used stuff. So a lot of times we can get cost share from vendors. You can get cost share for your time on the project. Like if you have other people that donate their time. A lot of times my time is cost shared a lot to different projects when them in startup, and it's an easy way to get cost share. But sometimes there's people on campus that might help with your project and their time can be cost shared. But you can't cost share federal money to federal money. So if you have someone helping you that's paid with federal funds, their time cannot be cost shared with, because it can't be federal money. But yeah. So then just to kind of look at this with the, there's other things you might need, copying and printing. Maybe this isn't that type of project, but if you have like serving students, you might be doing a lot of outreach. Sometimes there's publication costs for like research projects. That's a common one too. And you might just estimate like, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,200 a year for something like publications that you might, there's like fees to apply, I believe. There's not participant support costs, but if you had them, say you had like student tuition. And I know this isn't related, but maybe they're going to take an EV course. Maybe you're going to train some students in EV installation or something.
Yeah, or just, I don't know if it could be that, like SSM students or somebody like that, but there could be just, what about educating the public? Let's say we did outreach to the public. I guess that, I don't know the student tuition, but there could be supplies and other student related costs, food, just, yeah. It's a lot of hours. There might be a break, there might be food, that would be.
Yeah, if there's food, so say you're gonna have like a kickoff event.
Yeah. Yeah, promotion, let's say there was having to pay the Maui News or Maui Now or somebody else to promote the events.
So that'd be like other costs for outreach, maybe. So food, okay. Food, you might think food is a participant support cost, but it depends on how, if it can be allocated to each individual person. Say
Yeah.
a large kickoff event to promote using electric vehicles, right? And there's a couple of rules about food. One, it can't just be for college staff. Like that's not allowable. But
Maybe for the public, yeah.
in the public, or it's for your participants or whatever, that your participants that aren't UH staff, then you can put food on. But if you're having a large event, it's not directly allocable to participants or people. So that would be materials and supplies.
But how about that outreach number? That seems like it could be quite inclusive, and like maybe the whole event or whatever could be in that number.
For outreach?
Yeah.
It's still not a participant support cost.
I see.
It's an other cost. And
something other, yeah.
Another thing that goes in other would be like conference fees.
Right.
Oops.
Yeah, that could be thousands of dollars, actually.
Let me see, like maybe 1,000 per person or something like that. So that goes in other, that actually does not go into travel, that conference fees go in others. So So say we have student tuition, maybe we have some SSM students that are going to take a class. So maybe we'll have 20 SSM students times, let's say it's a 3-credit class. So I just use 150, so maybe times $450.
I mean, realistically, it might be non-credit class, like an OSET sort of class.
Right, and those tend to be higher.
Yeah.
Right, so 150 per credit usually if it's a 3-credit per class, but if it's an OSET class, maybe it'll be like $1,200. I don't know.
Yeah.
So say we have then 24,000 in that, and you see that again is not added to your indirect costs.
Yeah.
So then our indirect cost rate, let's say it's 45,000. Well, you know what? This is more other. That falls in the other categories, right? This is not primarily education. And so if you have multiple activities, you go by what's 50% or more. So even though we have education and training in here now, and Stuart might not actually have any in his project, we just put it in for the example. But 50% or more of the project is not dedicated to student education and training. So then we could use one of the other rates. So this would fall into other sponsored activities on campus. And that fiscal rate is 36.5%. So I'm going to change the indirect cost to 36.5%. And there we go. And then Stuart might be like, oh, the grant I'm going for is only 400,000. So then we got to go back and start eliminating costs, right? Because when you start your budget, you're always way over. And then you go and you keep refining to make it, keep cutting and shaving stuff off. You're like, okay, maybe we'll only pay them 10%. Maybe this is only be 3%. And maybe,
Well, what if we just change the number of charging stations to 20 in that case?
right? Maybe we change 20 charging. You know what? Maybe we really don't need the EV test car. And then, you know,
No, I think we need that. I think we need the EV.
okay, we need the test car, but we have one, don't we?
Somebody's got to test drive it.
I think we have a test car on campus. We have an EV car, but anyway. So maybe because it's half the cost, maybe this is like only be 120,000, right? So you start, and then you're like, okay, I really don't need to do tuition for students. So you just keep cutting and cutting until you get to the cost that you need to do. Like maybe we're gonna not have, maybe we're just gonna have one person come once and it's $6,000 for their contract. And maybe we're not gonna have as big of a kickoff event. Maybe we cut supplies, maybe our kickoff event, we're gonna keep it kind of short. Maybe only 2 people need computers, right? And then
Melissa, how about personnel? Does it matter where you hire or the hiring comes from, whether it's RCUH or UH? I mean, I know the pay scale is different. So would that matter?
well, no, I mean, RCUH, your benefit amount is lower.
Okay.
So fringe is like, as you can see, it's like right now it's 37% for a full-time person. UH right now is like
59, yeah.
well, it's like it's less, it's like 51 or something. It dropped. That's only because they're holding certain benefits, and we're afraid they might try to make that up because it was like 62% before COVID happened. So you got to be careful with the UH rates because I'm guessing that sooner or later they're going to pop back up to that 60%. So yes, your fringe, I mean, sometimes when I can't get things to work out, I make them RCUH, or you might know like what your personal fringe rate is, and you can determine that from what you've been paid. Like I know because significant other pays for my health insurance or it's on his plan, I know that my benefit amount is 22%. So I know that personally for me, like if I would put my salary on a grant, I know that my actual fringe rate is 22%. But then all of a sudden maybe his benefits change and he changes jobs and I need my own benefits. Then oops, all of a sudden I need to be at the, I'm an RCUH, I need to be at the 37%, right? And so then that's a big oops, because I have to make up that money somehow. Then for yearly, if you go into years next year, I usually multiply times like 1.03 for your salary, and then even for the fringe rate, I usually multiply times 1.03. So, other questions and thoughts on budgets? Wendy, what's your question?
Yeah, if you need to, if this project needs to use a UH employee or let's say community college, let's say Maui Community College employee for just one day, where will you put that?
If you need to pay them, I put an intermittent.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then I put the number of hours. So say it's one day, but maybe a couple days, maybe it's prep time. So maybe like 20 hours, like 45 or 50 is a good just hourly rate to have because maybe it'll cost more. It's really hard to pay someone for one day of work. So generally it's hard to pay employees at the college additional amounts. And generally it's too much work for them to someone to recap that amount from your grant for their time. So generally someone on campus has to volunteer their time or consider it to be under their, if it's just like a day or two. If it's ongoing work, you can try to pay people, but there's a lot of parameters around it. So that reminds me, I need to figure out how to pay someone. We do a lot of balancing between UH and RCUH, but when it comes to federal money, there's things that they just won't do. Like RCUH will not do multiple positions within RCUH. Even if it's below 50% or above, so maybe you want to pay 50% for one project and 25% from another project. RCUH will not make two positions. Then you go to UH. So you can have a UH and an RCUH position. But if they're both federal and it's over 100%, they won't do it.
Okay, good. So you can have personnel that's half UH employed and half RCUH if need be then. Okay.
Yes. So you can hire someone like casual hire for UH. If you go 19 hours or less, then it can be intermittent for like a year period. It's like almost case by case. I mean, I have so many problems hiring the person you want to hire. It's difficult. Like a faculty or staff, if they're 11 months, you pretty much can't pay them.
Okay, so this exercise, it spells out 1 year, but we know this project cannot be accomplished in 1 year. So how do you know how many years it will take to get to his goals?
Well, you have to make it educated, whatever the project period is, right? So it usually goes by the grant and you're like, can I do that in the grant? So then we go into project year 2.
Yeah, the grant kind of frames it. It seems like the last one was 3 to 5 years, for example. So we had to make a choice about whether it was going to be closer to the 3 years or to the 5 years, but the grant specifies the time period.
So then I do everything times 1.03. Oops, not like that though. I forgot. Actually, what I do is I point it to the first page. Trying to be simple. but I do everything times 1.03. I could do year one. I don't know if you can see that formula, but I point it to year one times 1.03. I messed it up. No, I didn't. And I do the same with the fringe rates because we know they go up every year. So then I go towards year one times 1.03. So then you go back again, year two. It's like, okay, now for year two, we know we don't need EV charging stations. We don't need test cars. We probably still need infrastructure supplies. We're probably not going to have a kickoff event. We don't need computers. Maybe travel goes up. Fees goes up. So once you have year one, you can get your year two pretty quickly. So I just copy the whole page, paste it in here, did year two, and same for year three. So I can just like copy year two. We'll say it's a 3-year project. It's basically what the funder is saying that it can do. So then I add a year three. So project funding year 3. And then these, I'm going to again point to year one. Times 1.03 times 1.03, right? Two years. That makes sense? 2 years. And then I'm going to just pull the formula down. And then same with this. Times 1.03 twice. Then I'm just going to pull the formula down. And sometimes if I have to cut in the final years, I might say, oh, the grant's wrapping up. So maybe we only need like these positions like 10 months, right? Or maybe like sometimes you're dealing with the total amount. So that's sometimes way where I cut like, okay, maybe we're winding down. I can cut some of the final year positions a little bit. Or even the startup, like if I know my total cost, I'm like, okay, realistically, we're not gonna have a project manager hired in the first month, maybe the second month, and maybe these two in the second month. I would never delay though more than 2 months in hiring staff. 1 month for the project manager, project director, or whoever's the main person, and then no more than 2 months for other people. Because even though we know it might take our office 3 to 4 months to hire them, I don't want the sponsor to know that. They're not gonna like that. They're not gonna think we're working fast enough. So even though it's the truth that some of these positions may take 3 or 4 months to hire, you're just always going to be behind. I mean, that's the one stressful thing about grant work is that you're always behind. By the time you get the award in the account, you're already 2 or 3 months behind.
Yes.
You never make it up. Does that kind of make sense? So then we did all 3 years for.
Yeah.
What I usually do is I usually want to know what total project costs. So then I might go just make a formula up. I might anywhere, and I might just go this equals year 1 plus year 2 plus year 3. So I always want to know.
Dum, dum, dum.
It's the same 1.5.
1.5. That's your magic number. So we're magic number.
I know that's the maximum they were going to give was 1.5. So I think we got pretty close.
And I'll show you, let me stop this share. I'll show you like what I do with my multi-year budgets. Let me pull something up. That's a good one.
Yeah, sorry about my message. I got the dates wrong. My was next week. I thought we were at the end of the month already. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. Let me see, one of my 5-year or my bigger year budgets. So this gets complicated, but if you ever are working on multi-year ones, I can share stuff with you. But basically, I mean, this, so what I do is I still have like my, oh, I see. So I still have my yearly budgets that look almost exactly the same as what we just did, you know? So I have all the staff in here, and I have all the fringe, and I have all the things for every year. Same thing, you know, but then in the end, I pull it to a summary that pulls from those, so that I can see what I'm doing. And this one's actually more complicated. I didn't think about it, but there's YCC on there too. But sometimes you have to break it down. If you have a multi-campus budget, you know, the funder doesn't care which college they're coming from, but we need to give them their total amounts. And also, like this one, I needed to break it down by activity. So you can just make your cover formulas, like, you know, to get what you need for your grant. But I tend to do that in multi-years because I want to know when you're filling out the federal forms or different forms, I just want to know the totals for each year and for each line item usually. So they usually want to know like year 1 totals, year 2 totals, year 3 totals, and then your grand total. And you just want to make sure it matches up between all your forms. So that's pretty much all I have. Questions?
Yeah.
I shared some forms with you too that could help. The budget justification. Do you want me to share the links, or do you have them in your email?
I got it from the email.
Yeah. So again, there's the budget cheat sheet. It's kind of nice. It's pretty much a Word version of the Excel file, but it maybe explains a little bit more that you can kind of think through it if you just don't. If Excel is not your thing, you can work through that. I love Excel because it gives all my calculations for me.
Melissa, would it be possible to get the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be using it for doing our own presentations just because there's so much valuable stuff in there. And if I try to write it all down, I kind of lose the thread. So it'd be
You
great.
can drop it in the chat. Yeah.
So here, I'm going to share a couple of things. Like here, I don't know if people understand I'm doing this, but here is a higher level folder. So right now we're on concept development. I didn't put the PowerPoint, but I'm going to do it right now as we speak. So if you go to the higher level folder, that's grant writing resources.
Mhm.
First we went under finding funding, and now we're in concept development. So I've been putting the videos and the PowerPoints here.
Oh, that's one in the top 2.
What is that?
Oh, no, that's a video. Sorry.
I'm just renaming it right now.
Okay.
There was a shared folder for the class. I kind of see all the individual stuff, but where does the shared folder?
It's under grant writing resources, if it's shared with you.
See the link in the chat, Stuart?
Yeah.
You clicked on that?
Oh, there it is. Yep, got it.
So this is in concept development. And you see there's the budget template there, the budget cheat sheet, the budget justification. And then there's a PowerPoint, concept development.
Got it.
Oh, yeah. There it is.
I just uploaded it. Is that good?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've been putting the workshops up there too, because Joyce wants them.
Hmm.
So I'm just trying to build resources to help people. My thought in doing these workshops is to get people writing, more people writing, because if you all write grants, that's more work than I could possibly do. But I think part of it is you just learn by doing. So
Mhm.
one of Louis' arguments in this is like, you just need to give people projects and have them do it. So maybe that's true too. So I might be knocking at any of your doors. Stuart already is done.
Yeah. Right on.
So any other questions?
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Eventually what I want to do, but I haven't had time, it has been a priority, is if you see the grant database, there's a UHMC grant database. So my idea was to put various grants in here and the links to their folders where you could see the different, like the grant itself, all the pieces to it. So if you click on like the US Department of Labor link, there's a folder you can go to, and then that folder has the whole entire proposal. Because a lot of times we don't have to start from scratch from things. There's work already done that you can take advantage of. But it's labor intensive to create this. And I was really good at putting all my folders and everything online until like COVID hit and I've been working from home, and all of a sudden things got messy. So my thought was to create this so then people can look at the database and find previous grants. So yeah.
So I just clicked on the link and I got a you need access message and I'm requesting access. Oh. I just got a message that said an email was sent. It takes a little while to get here.
Yeah, I probably have to change the sharing settings. There, Wheeler? Must be it.
Well, no. Zinner at Hawaii. I thought I was connecting from my UH account, but
Maybe that's it. I think anybody can view from a Hawaii.edu. Oh no, maybe not. Velma, you have a Hawaii EU.
I cannot.
I can work on that. Eventually I'll work on that. That's a work in progress. It's not a high priority, but I think it'd be helpful.
yeah.
So, well, thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Melissa, that was great.
I think
Very
next
helpful.
talking about activities and how they align to objectives. I think that's what it was.
A good day, a good way to start the morning.
So yeah, so that's what it'll be next time. And I think for people, that's the most exciting part of what they're going to do. It's like the heart of the proposal, right? You know what you're going to do. So that's a good starting place, I think. I mean, I start with the budget and just the overview and the objectives, but I think with your first time, starting with what you will do is probably the easiest.
Yeah, because I realized as you were entering all that information, I could see the goals happening, you know, like how you went from the infrastructure or the personnel, the infrastructure, and then you talked about the education and training. So you can kind of see now where the project is going to head towards, right? I mean, yeah, it really helped to see that visually, because then now the narrative can come naturally after that, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to know. And you have to know like your percentage of time, like how much work people are going to do. See, I feel like you just can't write what you're going to do until you know your budget.
Yeah.
So, sounds good. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank
Have a
you.
good weekend.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Bye.
Uh-huh. Yeah.